Welcome to this explainer. Look, right now, the world is standing on the absolute precipice of a massive, unprecedented global shock. We're watching a high-stakes standoff unfold that threatens the very fuel we need to fill our tanks, fly our planes, and even fertilize the crops that end up on our dinner tables. Today, we're going to break down the mechanics of the current global energy crisis, analyze the data, the geography, and look at the geopolitical maneuvers that are completely shaking up the world economy.
To really grasp the sheer gravity of this situation, we just need to look at a pretty stark warning from the International Energy Agency over in Paris. They're already calling this the biggest ever energy disruption in history. I mean, wow. You might hear experts comparing this to the 1973 Arab oil embargo, the 1979 Iranian Revolution, or the 1991 Gulf War, but here's the vital catch today. Global demand and population have absolutely skyrocketed since then. We simply consume vastly more energy now, making any modern disruption exponentially more dangerous.
Okay, Section 1, Global Chokepoint, the energy crisis.
So if you want to understand all this global panic, you really have to look at the Strait of Hormuz. It is the absolute lifeline for global oil transit between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. We're talking about a super narrow maritime choke point here, but honestly, the entire planet's economic stability rides heavily on the ships passing through there every single day.
20 million. That's the number of barrels of crude oil and refined products that normally flow through there daily. But right now, that massive flow has essentially hit a brick wall. Instead of a steady stream of tankers, tracking data is showing literally single digits making it through, mostly because ships are actively being fired upon and seized.
And the fallout from that blockage is just catastrophic. We're looking at a peak supply loss of over 12 million barrels a day. To put that into perspective, that is 11.5% of total global oil demand. Just poof, erased from the market. Now, to try and cushion this massive blow, they've released 400 million barrels from strategic stockpiles. But let's be real, you can only rely on reserves for so long when over 11% of the world's daily fuel is trapped behind a blockade.
Moving on to Section 2. Economic shockwaves, ripple effects.
This sets off a crazy domino effect. See, the Gulf doesn't just export crude oil, they've heavily invested in massive refineries, so they export the refined stuff we use daily. So step 1, crude gets blocked. Step 2, international markets suddenly lack supply. That brings us to step 3, huge shortages in refined goods, like jet fuel and agricultural fertilizers. And finally, step 4, it hits us at home. Airlines like Lufthansa and KLM are already having to cut short-term flights because jet fuel costs are going through the roof. And since fertilizer needs these same flows, well, those fuel shortages are going to eventually show up as severe food inflation at the grocery store.
Now, this really highlights why today is so fundamentally unique. Think back to 2022. The world, and especially Europe, got hit with a sudden, overnight loss of pipeline gas from Russia. It was an instant, massive shock. But today's crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, it's incremental. Every single day this blockade drags on, the global economy bleeds just a tiny bit more supply. A couple of days won't break the system, sure, but as we push into months of cumulative losses, the damage becomes deeply, deeply entrenched.
All right, Section 3, Geopolitical Chess, Leverage and Tactics.
So major state players are absolutely jumping on this shortage to gain strategic leverage. First up, you've got Iran, seizing ships in the strait to extract geopolitical concessions. Controlling that transit of energy, that's their absolute strongest card right now. In response, the U.S. is maintaining naval blockade pressure by actually seizing Iran-linked ships, trying to force them back to the bargaining table. And meanwhile, Russia's making moves too. They recently announced they're cutting the flow of oil from Kazakhstan to Germany through the Druzhba pipeline. They're citing technical possibilities, but ultimately, they're using this to pressure the EU over that recent €90 billion lifeline to Ukraine.
To really get a sense of how incredibly vulnerable European nations are to these games, just consider Berlin's oil imports. The Berlin area actually relies on Kazakhstan for 17% of its oil. But because that oil flows right through a Russian-controlled pipeline, Moscow's recent cuts leave Germany suddenly scrambling to replace nearly a fifth of its capital's fuel supply, almost overnight. It is a perfect, terrifying example of just how fragile these interconnected dependencies really are.
Let's look at Section 4, Green Escape Route, Seeking Independence. As Europe desperately tries to wean itself off all this imported oil and gas, they're running into a massive hurdle: China's dominance in green tech. Take French President Emmanuel Macron. At the inauguration of a new domestic lithium mine, he flat out warned that Chinese competitors are driving prices down to secure a global monopoly on battery tech, basically calling it dumping fueled by overcapacity. So as Western nations scramble to build their own green infrastructure, they're finding themselves miles behind. And the stakes in this EV battery race are incredibly high. I mean, the EU relies on a staggering 95% imported oil and 90% imported gas. To break that dependence, France is rushing to open this new lithium mine aimed at equipping 700,000 electric vehicles a year by 2030. But look at what they're up against. Chinese battery maker CATL just unveiled a battery that goes from a 10 to 98% charge in just 6.5 minutes, giving a 1,500-kilometer range. The technological and pricing gap here is massive.
But here's the real kicker. The severe time delay built into this green transition. You simply can't flip a switch and replace oil with domestic batteries. For France's new lithium mine, we're talking up to 5 years just to clear the planning, administrative, and environmental hurdles. It's going to be 5 to 6 years before that mine actually starts producing any output. Green energy is a fantastic long-term structural shift for sure, but it simply cannot solve an immediate oil supply shortage today.
Which brings us to Section 5. Oil is still king, the reality check. So, we really have to stop and ask the big, pivotal question here. Can solar panels, heat pumps, and EVs actually fix this immediate, massive supply crisis? Well, the uncomfortable truth is no. No, they can't. First off, to even manufacture low-carbon tech like solar panels or wind turbines, you fundamentally still need heavy amounts of oil and gas. And second, the global economy is just too deeply intertwined with fossil fuels. Giant markets across Asia still desperately rely on Middle Eastern flows. Take Iraq, for instance. They traditionally export over 3 million barrels a day specifically to Asian markets right through the Strait of Hormuz. You just can't replace that sheer volume overnight with a bunch of solar arrays. Transitioning to renewables is absolutely vital for energy independence, but it is not a short-term fix for the geopolitics of today.
And that leaves us with this final thought. We're watching all these countries frantically dig for lithium and build out domestic battery supply chains to escape the grip of oil choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. But as we pivot to an economy entirely reliant on rare earth metals and foreign-dominated battery tech, we really have to ask ourselves, are we actually achieving true energy independence? Or are we simply trading one global choke point for another? Thank you so much for watching this explainer. And remember, always keep questioning the data in front of you.